So what I would like to do tonight is to talk to Damien as someone who experienced a reality that all of us only entertain in nightmares or in books of fiction or by watching a crime television show from the comfort of our living room. It's a reality that defies imagination in that many of us fear incarceration. It's not even real. So Damien, I wanted to ask you, at what point when you found yourself on death row, what point did the enormity and the reality of being on death row occur to you?
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome back to the Hawk and Load Case Files. I'm your host, Hawk and Load. If you're here watching this video, chances are you're a true crime junkie like me. If you're not, it's possible you're a headbanging metalhead and YouTube just keeps throwing my videos in your face. Either way, you're all familiar with true crime in some capacity. Whether you binge JCS criminal psychology videos or you used to watch CSI back in like 2007, chances are you have an idea of what a homicide detective is. You most likely have some opinion of the American justice system and the process of convicting suspected criminals for heinous crimes. For those of us who consume true crime content in large quantities, we're often exposed to the cunning, truth-seeking detective archetype. He or she is the good guy on the side of truth and justice, and along with the righteous prosecutors, are representing the victims that can no longer represent themselves. They are serving justice to these monstrous criminals. We've watched a lot of caught red-handed and decisive cases and seen the justice served cold. But homicide detectives are fallible human beings, just like you and I, and just like the suspects being grilled in the hot seat. Confirmation bias and corruption are rampant in many homicide cases, and it's not unheard of for innocent people to end up slammed in a cage for a crime that they did not commit. Today, I intend to introduce you to three young men, a corrupted justice system, and a tragic story that has yet to meet its conclusion. Please, sit back and allow me to tell you the story of the West Memphis Three. The political landscape of the mid to late 80s and early 90s, through the presidencies of Ronald Reagan and George Bush Sr., was that of a staunch conservative American population. As I've gone over in the past on this channel, the counterculture of the time was the rebellious heavy metal headbangers and the hardcore punk rockers. Bands like Slayer and Black Flag inspired an outlet of aggression for a generation of suppressed teenagers, resulting in the persecution of these hard rock genres as a whole by the post-Vietnam parents at the time. By 1992, the United States had been under the rule of its third consecutive Republican president. The political temperature of the American public throughout these conservative presidencies painted a picture of religious, God-fearing families in pursuit of the American dream. With Ronald Reagan running on a platform of the Christian conservative, as well as his economic successes while in office, permeated through the country, setting a clean, whitewashed canvas for things like punk rock and heavy metal to vandalize in all of its rebellious, aggressive, and vulgar glory. Although the streak of Republican presidents ended with the 1992 election of Bill Clinton, it takes a long time for the zeitgeist to change, with the populations that elected these administrations still existing to this day. I'm trying to paint a picture of this period in American history because it's important when trying to analyze exactly what went wrong in our case today. So with that in mind, I'm going to usher you back to another phenomenon, one I've covered before and will probably cover again: the fear of satanic cults operating in God's country of choice, the Satanic Panic of the 80s and 90s. The Bible Belt is a region of the southern United States in which socially conservative Protestant Christianity plays a strong role in society and politics, and church attendance across the denominations is generally higher than the nation's average. The region contrasts with the religiously diverse Midwest and Great Lakes, and the Mormon corridor in Utah and southern Idaho. Often referred to as flyover states, these areas hold a large portion of the American population. Large percentages of these populations fall under some sect of Christianity, with varying levels of adherence to the teachings. Regardless of religious conviction, this fact serves to create a culture of down-home, God-fearing people, with the state of Arkansas being a hotbed for the Christian culture. Arkansas sits quite high on a Pew Research study list of the proportion of evangelical Protestants per state in the American South. With 70% of the people who identify with a Christian sect stating that religion is very important to them, it is a particularly religious area during a particularly religious time. With a culture like this and a political landscape like that of the mid-80s and early 90s, all it took was one match to light the fire of satanic panic across the nation. In an article for the New York Times, Alan Uhas wrote,
"Early in the 1980s, baseless conspiracy theories about cults committing mass child abuse spread around the country. Talk shows and news programs fanned fears, and the authorities investigated hundreds of allegations. Even as the cases slowly collapsed and skepticism prevailed, defendants went to prison, families were traumatized, and millions of dollars were spent on prosecutions. The phenomenon was so sprawling that in its aftermath, it took on several names, like the ritual abuse scare or the daycare panic. But one name has increasingly stuck: the Satanic Panic."
Satanic panic and cult hysteria was pandemic across the country, with tens of thousands of unsubstantiated cases claiming satanic ritual abuse of children. Crackpot psychiatrists claimed to be unlocking repressed memories in young children, when in fact, they were leading them to a conclusion that they had already made up in their minds. A confirmation bias among mental health professionals and law enforcement led to accusations and, in some cases, even convictions of innocent people for imagined crimes. It was a modern-day Salem witch trials. Remnants of the satanic panic hysteria are still prevalent today. The Oxford Dictionary defines confirmation bias as
The tendency to interpret new evidence as confirmation of one's existing beliefs or theories.
meaning you or an investigating party has already consciously or subconsciously made up their minds on what has taken place, or on what is and isn't true. We are all guilty of it, and a healthy skeptical mind is aware of this bias when trying to get to the truth. So, let's recap. Satanic Panic, a conservative political landscape, and the God-fearing Bible Belt hotspot of Arkansas. All of these act as a powder keg in the case of a tragic day on May 6, 1993, in West Memphis, Arkansas. Our story today revolves mainly around a troubled young man named Damian Eccles. Eccles was born Michael Wayne Hutchinson on December 11, 1974. As a child, he lived with his mother and father in Marion, Arkansas, until their divorce when he was 8 years old. After that, his family moved around frequently, with Eccles stating that by the age of 10, he had attended 8 different schools. At 13, he denounced his birth name, taking on a new one, along with his stepfather's last name. The family eventually landed in West Memphis, Arkansas, and at the age of 17, Eccles was only in his freshman year of high school. Eccles was a bit of an outcast. He was a standout in a whitewashed area, wearing exclusively black clothing and listening to heavy metal music, making him a bit of a misfit to say the least. He was known to write dark, expressive poetry, and had stated an interest in magic, as well as the writings of Anton LaVey and Stephen King. Suffice it to say, the kid was a little dark. Eccles was arrested at age 17 after running away from home with his girlfriend. He was diagnosed as manic depressive and prescribed antidepressants. He was often singled out by Crittenden County juvenile officers and questioned anytime they had an unsolved crime to investigate, but these were fruitless attempts to prosecute him for anything. Eccles had attempted to end his own life unsuccessfully 3 times between 1991 and 1993 by various methods. Then 16-year-old Jason Baldwin, another subject in our story, was a close friend of Eccles, sharing the same interests in music and being a general outcast in the area. Eccles and Baldwin spent a lot of time together. Jesse Miskelly Jr. was a mentally handicapped 17-year-old with a circumstantial connection to Eccles and Baldwin that we will get into a little later on. Jesse was abandoned by his mother at 4 years old and left in the care of his father, Jesse Sr. He had a more severely mentally challenged brother who, according to the family, was institutionalized. Jesse Jr., in tests conducted by his defense team after his arrest, was found to be operating mentally at the level of a 5-year-old child. The same testing concluded that his IQ was in the range of 72. Eccles had a reputation of being into the occult, Satanism, and devil worshipping in the Crittenden County juvenile system. Eccles was and still is a bit of an eccentric attention seeker who, at age 18, stood out to law enforcement as a bit of a bad egg. The story of the West Memphis Three has been told countless times and been detailed by countless organizations and people. It is probably the most famous case of justice system corruption and wrongful conviction since the Salem witch trials. Satanic Panic hysteria was a viral sensation long before the internet, and it seems almost surreal that the events starting with the Robin Hood Hills murders all the way through to the 2011 exoneration of the West Memphis Three are a real part of American history.
May 5th, 1993.
I was crying, my friend was crying too.
A town paralyzed with fear.
We're all pretty upset and scared about, what's happened with the boys.
3 8-year-old boys disappear. May 6th.
Boys were tied. Their hands and feet were tied.
I was the one that was down in the water, that lifted my leg up, and a body floated to the top of the water.
Stevie Branch, Michael Moore, Christopher Byers murdered. The scene, Robin Hood Hills.
Just devastated. I hate it so bad.
On May 5th, 1993, at approximately 7 p.m., a concerned father, John Byers, called to report his 8-year-old son Christopher missing, along with Stevie Branch and Michael Moore, both also being 8 years old. The 3 boys were last seen together by multiple neighbors at around 6:30 p.m. after seeing Steve Branch's stepfather, Terry Hobbs, beckon them home. A light search was performed by law enforcement that evening, along with a fruitless search of the area by volunteers from the neighborhood. At 8 a.m. the next morning, a more thorough search was organized by the police and led by Crittenden County Search and Rescue. A shoulder-to-shoulder human chain search was conducted across the area of Robin Hood Hills, the place where the boys were last seen by witnesses. Despite the large effort, nothing was found. At around 1:45 p.m. on May 6th, juvenile parole officer Steve Jones noticed a child's black shoe floating in a creek. A search conducted on the ditch yielded the bodies of Stevie Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Byers, nude and hog-tied with their shoelaces. The autopsy revealed that Byers died of blood loss due to multiple injuries, while Moore and Branch had been drowned. The crime scene was described as having been swept clean. Despite a lack of blood around the area of the bodies, police believed the boys were killed in the location they were found, as well as sexually assaulted, with Byers' genitalia being mutilated. In expert testimony during the trial proceedings, it was posed by the prosecution that Byers had been intentionally mutilated, with later expert consulting concluding that the genital area was targeted with apparent gouging and slashing indicative of rage. This was not found in the other 2 victims. The boys' clothing were found, mostly inside out, around the scene of the crime, with 2 of the victims' underwear failing to be recovered at all. With evidence being sparse, police had very little to go on, and as such, assumptions were made. With the mutilation and sexual elements, police immediately suspected satanic cult ritual abuse. The slayings made national news, and rewards for any information leading to an arrest were offered. Police were under pressure to find the cold, sadistic killer of these young innocent boys. Typically in my videos, the main foundation of the material lies with the event. Whether it's a single murder or a mass shooting, the base of everything spoken about is the heinous act that turns would-be killers into certified monsters. Our heroic homicide detective archetype, along with the chain of justice that leads up to the jury that convicts our villain, are perfectly in place to tell the story and find the truth. I'll go over what happens afterward or where the murderer is now, and we all go on our merry way. But as many of you may already know, our story is just beginning. Headlines of the Robin Hood Hills child murder spread virally through the country. Special coverage by late-night crime shows and news outlets offering up large sums of money and rewards had the West Memphis police under quite a bit of pressure to find the boys' killer. Or killers. The investigation began with Police Lieutenant James Sudbury inquiring with Juvenile Officer Steve Jones about his thoughts on the murders. Conflicting reports state that Jones was present for no apparent reason at the scene itself, but it appears unconfirmed. Either way, both officers agreed that the murders had cult overtones, likely due to the perceived sexual mutilation, and connected it immediately to satanic human sacrifice. It was this hunch, and this hunch alone, that spurred Officer Jones to suggest interrogating then 18-year-old Damian Eccles, deeming him, without any evidence, a cultist capable of murdering children. After all, the kid wore black t-shirts and listened to heavy metal, so clearly that screams, "I murdered and mutilated 3 children for the glory of Lucifer." Jesus Christ. From the Encyclopedia of Unsolved Crimes.
At first glance, Eccles seemed a fair target for witch-hunting police. An alienated child of divorce who habitually dreed in black, he had abandoned the Catholicism of his parents to adopt the nature worship of Britain's ancient Druids. Eccles called himself Damien after a 19th century priest who treated lepers in Hawaii, but the sobriquet was easily, and perhaps deliberately, confused with the Antichrist figure portrayed by various actors in the Omen series of popular horror films produced between 1976 and 1992.
Eccles was interrogated on May 9, 1993, and was grilled on the details of the crimes. Despite the details of the murders being common knowledge among all of West Memphis, he was asked if one of the victims suffered more damage than the other 2. When Eccles stated that one of the boys suffered genital mutilation, police took his statement as guilty knowledge of the crime and became certain that Eccles was guilty. He was released that day with no charges filed, but this was just the beginning of the West Memphis witch hunt. On the day the boys went missing, Vicki Hutchison had gone to the Marion County Police Department to disclose to them that she saw the 3 young boys at a place called the Playhouse, a location not far from where the bodies were found. In tow, she had her young son Aaron, who began to tell fantastical tales of being held captive by, quote, Spanish-speaking motorcyclists, and even claimed to have witnessed Damian Eccles killing the 3 boys. His accounts were far from believable, and police disregarded his stories as fiction. Vicki, however, enticed by the $30,000 reward, is theorized to have told her son these stories, hoping to nab the reward money being offered for information that led to an arrest and conviction. But alas, they were not believed. Hutchison, having missed out on the reward money, then approached 17-year-old Jesse Miskelly. Miss Kelly often babysat for Vicki, and knowing of his mental deficiencies, she asked him to introduce her to Eccles, even though Miss Kelly wasn't acquainted with Damien himself. To elaborate, Eccles had been rumored to be bragging about the killings to any and everyone around West Memphis while intoxicated. A witness even gave a statement stating as much, though he later recanted, explaining that he was simply parroting the rumors. Hutchison set up her own wire and attempted to record their conversation, hoping that Eccles would incriminate himself to her. She brought her recording to the police, but the audio was entirely inaudible. Her second attempt at the reward money was now a bust. The very next day, Vicky Hutchison went back to the police, claiming to have attended a satanic ritual with Eccles and Miss Kelly 2 weeks before the murders. She claimed that Eccles had driven them to a ritual site in Terrell, Arkansas, in a red Ford Fiesta. Investigators then determined that Eccles didn't have a driver's license, let alone access to a red Ford Fiesta. Hutchison then convinced the trusting Jesse Miskelly to go to the police and tell them that he had been with Eccles and saw the murders take place. What happened next isn't clear, but a brief portion of the confession was recorded late into Miss Kelly's interrogation.
Okay, Jesse, let's go straight to that date, 5/5 of 93, a Wednesday, early in the morning. You received a phone call, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
Who made that phone call?
Jason Baldwin.
All right, what occurred? What did he talk about?
He called me and asked me could I go to West Memphis with him, and I told him no, I had to work and stuff, and then he told me he had to go to West Memphis, so him and Damien went, then I went with him.
All right, when?
Wednesday.
All right, when did you go with him?
That morning.
At 9 o'clock in the morning?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
I went with them. When I was there, I saw Damien hit this one boy real bad, and then he started screwing him and stuff, and then
Alright, you've got in front of you a picture that was taken out of the newspaper, I believe. It's got 3 boys, and these are the 3 boys that were killed on that date in Robin Hood Woods. Okay, which one of those 3 boys is it you say Damien hit? The third picture, which will be
This boy right here?
Yeah.
All right, that's the Byers boy.
Christopher.
That's who you're pointing at?
Mm-hmm.
If you'll read the caption, the grisly slaying from left, 8-year-old Michael Moore, Stephen Branch, and Christopher Byers. Okay. So, you saw Damien strike Chris Byers in the head. What did he hit him with?
He hit him with his fist and bruised him all up real bad. And then Jason turned around and hit Steve Branch.
Okay.
And started doing the same thing. Then the other one took off. Michael Moore took off running. So I chased him and grabbed him and held him till they got there, and then I left.
Okay. Now, when he hits the first boy, where are they at when he hits him? In the woods. Okay, you've been down there in those woods before.
So,
Can you describe to me what in those woods, what's the location where you were? Is there a path you go down?
I was down a little path.
Alright, where does that path go to?
It lead out there close to the field, close to the interstate.
Okay.
Stuff where I was at.
Alright.
I was close by the interstate.
When he hits the first boy, and then Jason hits another boy, and one takes off running, where does he run to?
That one, he runs out, going out the park, and I chased him and grabbed him and brought him back. He ran out there, and I called him and brought him back. And then I took off.
Okay. Well, you came back a little bit later, and all 3 boys are tied.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
And then I took off and went home.
Alright. Have they got their clothes on when you saw them tied?
They had them off.
They had already gotten them off. When he first hit the boy, when Damien first hit the first boy, did they have their clothes on then? Alright. When did they take their clothes off?
Right after they beat up all 3 of them and beat them up real bad.
Beat them up real bad. And then they took their clothes off. Then they tied them.
Then they tied them up, tied their hands up. They start screwing them and stuff, cutting them and stuff. And I saw it and I turned around and looked. And then I took off running. I went home. And then they called me and asked me how come I didn't stay. I told them I just couldn't.
Just couldn't stay for long.
I couldn't stand to see what they were doing to me.
I've edited the audio for time, but even in the small part of what I've shown you, Miss Kelly has trouble keeping the story on track and is being led by the detectives to say what they want him to say. Even though Jesse says he took off running at multiple points in the story, they coach him into saying both that he came back to the scene and that he left at a later stage of the killings. Even pointing to the pictures to identify which child is hit by Damien, he identifies more, and the police correct him to indicate Byers. It's a frustrating piece of audio to listen to for anyone who is even remotely empathetic. This audio is just one of 3 taped confessions from Jesse Miskelly, and they all have the same sinister undertones. Jason Baldwin and Damien Echols were weird little goth kids, and there wasn't any room for them in God's country. And poor Jesse Miskelly was going down with the ship. These confessions were the entire foundation of the prosecution's case. These confessions are what cemented Damien Echols, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Miskelly as the West Memphis Three.
If you could go back to your life before the trial and change anything, would you?
I wouldn't change anything that's ever happened in my entire life. Nothing. Everything that has happened in my life has came together to create and make me the person that I am now. And if any of those things would change, then the person who I now am would not exist. I wouldn't think the same way about things. I wouldn't feel the same way about things. So there's no.
But the person that you are today is sitting on death row. You want to change it?
I don't think there was anything I could do to change that. What was it? I mean, become a clone, give up my personality, give up my identity, just march along like everyone else. I'd rather die first.
Nine hours after Miskelly began his recorded confession, arrest warrants were issued for Damien Echols and Jason Baldwin. They were charged with capital murder, and the then 16-year-old Baldwin was to be tried as an adult. Search warrants were issued for both of the boys' residences, and police seized everything from black t-shirts to a notebook that police claim Echols scribbled satanic writings and drawings in. Police claim that fibers found on Baldwin and Echols' clothing were microscopically similar to those of the murder victims' clothing. A knife was recovered from a lake behind Baldwin's house and was determined to be consistent with the wounds found on Christopher Byers' genitalia. Small traces of blood were found on a necklace worn by Echols, one of which was identified as belonging to Echols himself. The samples were too small to test for DNA. On August 15, 1993, all 3 alleged killers pled not guilty to their charges. Again, from the Encyclopedia of Unsolved Crimes.
On August 15, 1993, Jesse Miskelly joined Echols and Baldwin in pleading not guilty to all charges filed. The trials proceeded in a witch hunt atmosphere, with Miskelly the first to face a jury on January 19, 1994. Motions to suppress Miskelly's illegally obtained confessions were denied, and the statement was duly used against him. On February 4th, jurors convicted Miskelly on 2 counts of second-degree capital murder, resulting in an automatic sentence of life imprisonment without parole.
Echols and Baldwin were tried together in the same courtroom, just over 2 weeks after Miskelly's conviction. Vicki Hutchison was called to give testimony corroborating her story of Damien participating in satanic rituals. She later recanted her statements and said that she was saying what the police instructed her to say. She was never charged with perjury. The prosecution argued that heavy metal music and t-shirts, as well as novels by Stephen King, were proof of Eccles' participation in satanic cultism, with a cult expert testifying to the validity of the outrageous claims. My opinion on this might be a little biased, but this part in particular really pissed me off. For the prosecution's final trick, a jailhouse informant was called to the stand. Michael Carson was a cellmate of Jason Baldwin briefly, and it just so happens that Baldwin confessed the slayings to him while they were bunked together. Even without the blatant witch hunting up to this point, jailhouse informants like this are notoriously unreliable, as they tend to make things up to receive time off their sentence. Carson's story was particularly unbelievable, as he claimed Baldwin bragged about dismembering the children, as well as doing a few other vile things I probably can't talk about on YouTube. A pile of unverified circumstantial evidence was presented to a jury, with none of the physical evidence connecting any of the West Memphis Three to the crimes. Despite this fact, on March 18th of 1994, both Eccles and Baldwin were found guilty of 3 counts of capital murder. Baldwin was sentenced to life plus 40 years, while Damian Eccles was sentenced to death. With that, 3 innocent kids were put away for a crime they didn't commit, while 3 innocent boys were left dead in a creek, never to receive true justice. This case, my friends, has 6 victims and no happy ending. All of this, of course, is simply my judgment.
You could have people that are going to go, oh, the house is cursed, or that's where the little boy lived that the devil worshipers killed. The people that brought into the propaganda that the West Memphis Police Department and the media put forth, devil worshipers, because of some of the graffiti around, they got on that bandwagon and everybody jumped on board, and it was hysteria. People wouldn't let their children out.
You jumped on that bandwagon too.
Oh, I led the bandwagon.
But our story doesn't quite end just yet. The worldwide notoriety that this case received and calls for the exoneration of the West Memphis Three were spread in major part by a documentary series made by famed documentarians Joe Berlinger and Bruce Sanofsky. Paradise Lost, the child murders at Robin Hood Hills, released in 1996 and features a soundtrack of Metallica songs, the first movie that Metallica ever licensed their music to. And I recommend that you watch the famed trilogy if you're interested in this case. They go way more in depth than I did here. The years following the convictions of the West Memphis Three consisted of a multitude of appeals and public outcry for the exoneration of the 3 men. Reports of investigative, prosecutorial, and juror misconduct riddled this case and set a spotlight right on this miscarriage of justice. On October 29, 2007, papers were filed in a federal court by Eccles' defense lawyers seeking a retrial or his immediate release from prison. The filing cited DNA evidence linking Terry Hobbs, stepfather of victim Steve Branch, to the crime scene, and new statements from Hobbs' now ex-wife. Along with these revelations, there was new expert testimony that the assumed satanic ritual genital mutilation of Christopher Byers was the result of animal predation after the bodies had been dumped. On September 10, 2008, Circuit Court Judge David Burnett denied the request for a retrial, citing the DNA tests as inconclusive. That ruling was appealed to the Arkansas Supreme Court. On November 4, 2010, the Arkansas Supreme Court ordered a lower judge to consider whether newly analyzed DNA evidence might exonerate the 3. The justice also instructed the lower court to examine claims of juror misconduct, and after extensive negotiations, a plea deal was struck with the West Memphis Three, inputting Alford pleas. An Alford plea is essentially a guilty plea where the defendant gets to profess his innocence, but agrees that if this case is taken to trial, they are likely to be found guilty by a jury. Under the plea deal, all previous convictions were vacated, and the 3 men were sentenced to time served. On August 19, 2011, after spending more than 18 years in prison with Eccles on death row, Damian Eccles, Jason Baldwin, Jesse Miskelly were now free men.
Can't live our lives in fear. And as far as your question earlier, Damien, this was not justice, you know. In the beginning, we told nothing but the truth, that we were innocent, and they sent us to prison for the rest of our lives for it. And then we had to come here, and the only thing that the state would do for us was to say, hey, we'll let you go, only if you admit guilt. And that's not justice, no matter how you look at it. They're not out there trying to find who really murdered those boys. And I did not want to take the deal from the get-go. However, they're trying to kill Damien, and sometimes you just gotta fight the gun to save somebody.
Jason and I.
The way this story ends leaves a lot to be desired. Personally, while I believe that these men are innocent and are rightly walking free, they still technically are considered murderers on the record. This means that for the corrupt, witch-hunting police of West Memphis, Arkansas, the case is closed and requires no further investigation, resulting in a triple child murder cemented as unsolved. After 18 years of serving time for a murder that I and many others do not believe they committed, the West Memphis 3 could finally start their adult lives. As far as I've seen, they're integrating into a society that you and I have been able to take for granted every day without thought. No matter the reality, there are people that are still going to believe them guilty, and as such, the road has been hard. But if we come away from this with anything, I hope it is the crucial life lesson of never judge a book by its cover. We are all more alike than we are different, no matter our circumstances. And there's probably not a satanic cult digging tunnels under your local preschool and snatching up children. That's a good lesson too.
Well, I don't want to see them copping a plea of being guilty for something they don't want to do. But I don't have any control over that. I'm just a pawn in this, just like they are. They've been a pawn in this the whole time. They've been in prison inside the wire. I've been in prison out here in the public. But I've never lawyered up like Terry Hobbs. I've never had it have anybody speak for me. I've stood on my own 2 feet and defended myself to the end. And I always will. I'm not giving up. Just because they admit to this today, it's not over.
You feel like the killer is still out there?
I know it without a doubt. He lives 7 miles from me in Albert's Cabins, Highway 51 North, number 20.
Name him and tell me why you feel that he's the man.
His DNA, no alibi. His alibi is even shaky. They've had 18 years and they can't get their story straight. They've all told 3 or 4 different stories of what they did that night. How is Terry Hobbs in the woods at 6:30 searching when he doesn't even know there's a search party being involved? The 3 children haven't even been known missing. His own words ought to be enough to convict him. You cannot believe the state and Terry Hobbs. The state says the crime happened in the woods. That's what they said. Terry Hobbs puts his ass in the woods all night long back and forth and didn't see anything. So who's lying?
Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached the end of our story today. If you've made it this far, I cannot overstate how much I appreciate that you've given me your time. I am truly grateful to everyone who has allowed me to tell you these stories and my opinions on them. And with that, if you like the video, subscribe for more true crime commentary. This was the Honk and Load Case Files. I'm your host, Honk and Load, and until next time, stay metal. Of the West Memphis 3. You're fucking killing me. She's snoring so hard. All right. It's almost like she's unconsciously fucking with me. Holy shit. And that fly is back from last week. That guy still here. Holy shit. Dude, just fuck off. There's a fly in here. He's ruining my takes. Where do you come from?